Folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks. Welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania with my special guest today. My first interview on the channel since before I went to South Africa. It's none other than, let's try to do this in Afrikaans, even though it's not Afrikaans, Gideon Joubert. So that was kind of an Afrikaans and French amalgamation there. Gideon, how's it going?
Colonel, it's going fantastic on my side, and I hope it's going similarly well with you and the viewers tuned into this. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure. You know, I met a lot of folks in South Africa, and you and I made an effort to meet, but there's some things going on, and it just didn't work out. So not this time, but I guess we'll have to try for it next time.
Absolutely. No, I promise I'll have the fewer crises going on simultaneously. At least I hope so. It was a bit fatiguing, but yeah, it's I suppose like I'll beers on me on the next one.
Oh, I wasn't counting on that, but I like the sound of it.
It's a fair cop, I think.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get something here real quick without ripping my earphones out. I'm gonna have to rip them out. There we go. There we go. Okay. Whoops, and I lost my rubber thing. It's still in my ear. Wow, this thing keeps coming out. I think to get some new earpieces. That's I love Cape Town cap I was reaching for.
Oh, there we go. That's the mother city representing. Fortunately for something other than wine and what else do we have here? Wine, sunsets, and
well, you have
and lots of cocaine. Apparently,
you have the Cape Flats. You have gangland killings. You have, but so to that I say, away.
No, and they've been busy. They've been quite busy of late. I think there's been a few interesting little hotspots heating up. So yeah, never a dull moment.
That's true. Well, listen, I want to get you on to talk about this. I know that you're a gun rights advocate and someone that cares about personal defense. It's important, as am I. You know, it's interesting. Let me just give a little background, and actually, my background looks kind of weird compared to yours. So let me work on that very quickly here, because you've got kind of a plain background. I'm going to switch it around because mine's actually very distracting as things are right now. So hang on a second, because it's distracting me. If it's distracting me, it's probably distracting the audience. So let's go with something a little simpler than what you see behind me there. How about, that looks a little too grand. That looks a little too lavish. That looks a little too boring. I'm looking through a whole list of background images I have here. That looks a little too militaristic. I don't want that one. Let's go with, how about this? How's that? No, that one's moving. That's kind of distracting, isn't it? How about, no, I don't like that one. Here we go. Let's go with that one. Okay, how's that?
There we go. That's a safe one.
There we go. All right. So yeah. So let me just give a little bit of the background story here, so it makes sense, and I want to get your view on this, and we'll talk about how this relates to South Africa, if in fact it does. Well, in the United States, of course, we have the Second Amendment. It's enshrined right here in the U.S. Constitution. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be, whoops, come on there, get in front of the screen. I hate green screens. Shall not be infringed upon. It's right there in the Constitution. But of course, states create laws that infringe upon the Constitution and our guaranteed rights in there all the time. So for instance, New Jersey has very, very strict laws about firearms, and they criminalize and turn people into felons who are law-abiding citizens for failure to re-register and, you know, for possession of things that they've had their entire lives, and so on and so forth. Well, there's a court case that the Supreme Court just set aside, or they threw aside a Massachusetts law, and that's why I want to get you on here. We can talk about that. Plus, there was a victory for Second Amendment rights in New York a couple months ago from the last session of the court. Excuse me. So this session, the Massachusetts law, what happened, the backstory to it is a gentleman about 20 years ago who was a licensed firearm owner in Massachusetts, a law-abiding citizen with no criminal convictions and never done anything wrong, traveled to Washington, D.C., had a permit to carry a firearm. Excuse me, congested all of a sudden. Had a permit to carry a firearm, went to Washington, D.C., went to go into the American Museum of Natural History there, which is on the mall, part of the Smithsonian Institution, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a sign that says no firearms, which, when you find out that the District of Columbia doesn't allow people to have firearms, which is a violation of the Constitution, that kind of is silly. Why would you have signs telling people that once you're in the district, you can't have a firearm? You should have big signs before you enter the district saying, no firearms in the district, don't bring your firearms here. But anyway, so he goes up and carrying the firearm, he went to the security guard and said, listen, where do you store firearms for guests? Since I can't bring it in the building, where can I store it? They arrested him on the spot. He received a criminal conviction from the District of Columbia, and that was, I think it was a misdemeanor, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he, as a consequence of that, Massachusetts law forbid him from registering a firearm for 5 years. Now, he's a lawful firearm owner in Massachusetts, but because of an unconstitutional law in the District of Columbia, which isn't even a state, he's now barred from registering. So his license expired. He waited 7 years, and then he tried to reapply. And because of a misdemeanor conviction in D.C. for a firearm, for a person who'd had a firearm for years in Massachusetts without an incident, the local sheriff denied him a permit to have a firearm. And so he took this, and now, finally, nearly 2 decades later, it is at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court threw out the law, saying it was unconstitutional. Are you familiar with this case, and any thoughts on it as we get started in this conversation?
I've heard about it. I was not aware that it's been 2 decades in the making. From what I've seen in the United States, especially now that you've got constitutional carry in so many states, and that state laws have changed significantly from may issue to shall issue, and even to permitless carry. I think it was Vermont that never had permit requirements for firearm carrying at all. I think that was the only state that never had them, and now there's a whole bunch more. I think New Hampshire might be one of them as well. Things have changed. I think the gun rights playing field in America, by all appearances, has significantly changed from where it used to be. It is shocking to me to think that something like that could happen to somebody, that you still get criminally convicted, even though it's supposed misdemeanor instead of a felony charge, which, if I understand your legal system correctly, would be the hardcore one that you don't want. That includes prison time.
That's correct. That's for serious and violent crimes, and also, grand theft, things like that, which, apparently you can't commit in California unless you steal more than $1,000 worth of something.
No, exactly. So it's really awesome to hear that that's been turned around and thrown out. I mean, it doesn't do much to help him recover what has been through over the past 20 years. But is there perhaps a clever angle going forward as to how that can be crowbarred and leveraged for additional wins, and maybe to get DC even to, not that I know what the odds of that, but to change that status of the District of Columbia, that you're essentially criminalized for even bringing a firearm into it?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I wonder what will happen here. I don't really follow the cases on Second Amendment rights, because my view on Second Amendment rights is I have a constitutional right to have it. Come take it. That's my view on it. I was at Veterans of Foreign Warfare Post, where I'm the senior vice commander. That's the number 2. And they hoodwinked me into doing it because it was having lots of problems. And so I'm trying to pay it back to the community. But anyway, so I was there, and we had a recent inspection before I went to South Africa from the district. And the state's organized into state level, district, and then local level. And the district came through to make sure that, procedures are being followed. You know how it is. Bureaucracies always do that, even private organizations, nonprofit. So they came through, and I was talking to one of the inspectors afterwards, and for some reason firearms came up, and he goes, "Hey, here, look at this." So he pulls out his mobile, and he starts showing me photographs of his 7 gun safes, with the doors open. There's like 40 pistols in there. There's rifles and shotguns. And I'm thinking, it reminded me of Red Dawn, the original Red Dawn movie, where you could take this from my cold, bloody, dead hands or something like that. There are over 450 million licensed firearms in the United States, and like 180 million licensed firearm owners. It's funny because you see these idiots who know nothing about firearms because they grow up in a privileged little nanny state of welfare leftist liberalism, and they're afraid of firearms. They don't understand what they are. They don't appreciate the purpose of them, and we see this on, was it Joyless Behar on the Dystopian View? That's obviously a take on the show and the person. But Joyless Behar on this Dystopian View and Whoopi Goldberg, wait till black people get guns. 25% of black Americans are law-abiding registered firearm owners. And that's the second lowest percentage. Only 19% of Asians, only 31 or 33% of white Americans are firearm owners. And that's the highest, and they're closely followed by Hispanics, I think, at 29 or 31. So on average, most Americans, probably about 33% of Americans are lawful firearm owners. And these people, just really losing my mind. But as far as opening the door up, I'm not sure. We'll wait and see. And in a moment, I'll talk to you about 2 horrific cases that happened in neighboring state of New Jersey. But essentially what this is one jurisdiction criminalizes something that's constitutionally guaranteed, and that's used by your home jurisdiction to paint you as a criminal and deprive you of your rights. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it makes it's one of those sort of legalese blender cases where the application of the punishment, it firstly doesn't remotely fit the so-called crime that was committed, and it also does indicate a maliciousness inherent to not just the system but also the people that are internal to it and that are enforcing the laws as they're written. I mean, there is absolutely no reason, I'd imagine, for it to escalate to a point where you're physically arresting someone and throwing them in prison for a misdemeanor offense where they're not actually behaving in a criminal manner. They are in so-called unlawful possession, but I think there's also something that, and this is, it's the same problem in South Africa. It's probably not different in the US, but just because you're in so-called unlawful possession of an object doesn't mean you have criminal intent with it. I think there was a case here.
Hang on, I got to interrupt you. I agree. Joe Biden is in criminal unlawful possession of the presidency, and I don't think that means he's malicious.
Well, you know, we can have an argument about that pertaining to what he's actually doing with it.
We got to be careful on this platform, though.
Exactly. But there was a case in SA, I think, where there was a guy that did own an unlicensed firearm, but I can't remember the exact reasons why he had it. And the judge refused to criminally convict him, or the magistrate rather, because even though he was in unlawful possession and then he was found guilty on that, his reasons for being an unlawful possession were not, he could prove it was quite obvious to the court that there was no criminal intent with it, so he didn't get sentenced. And it's similar stuff like that where you go, you know, there needs to be a bit of common sense also applied when laws applied, but that doesn't always happen. And this is also why if laws are written badly, you can imagine that the worst person in the world is going to interpret that law in the worst way possible and apply it to such, which is again why people need to stop bad laws from becoming laws. And in cases of the American Second Amendment movement, the various ones, Gun Owners of America, the Firearms Policy Coalition, those guys actually actively rolling these bad things back, which is great to see. It's very positive.
Yeah, but it's a constant battle, you know. And let me just draw a parallel here with another case. Now, this is interesting because, of course, the same people who scream "my body, my choice" are, you know, trying to inject people in the arm, you know, not giving them a choice. But so those same people are the same sort of people who are now funding Planned Parenthood to hire recreational vehicles to drive to the borders of states that are restricting abortion, so that they can perform abortions to raise money for their ghoulish machine. So here's the thing. They will be the ones that think it's perfectly fine and will be up in arms if someone is arrested for violating a law in a state. Let's say, like Pennsylvania, if you commit abortion after 24 weeks, but that's 6 months, by the way. That's just sick. But let's say you do it 25 weeks, you have an abortion. That's a criminal offense. If you're arrested for that, they'll scream foul. That's just wrong. Because in Illinois, you can have an abortion. In New York, you can have an abortion. How can you do that? But at the same time, if I go from Pennsylvania, where I'm a licensed firearm owner, and drive 30 minutes south here in Maryland and take my firearm, and I don't have a license in Maryland, I will be arrested and charged with a felony in Maryland. And 36 years of faithful service defending this nation, getting shot at in multiple combat zones really don't matter, the fact that I'm abiding the law. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying. If there's no criminal intent, no criminal activity, these laws, I believe, are designed to restrict liberty and to punish law-abiding citizens. That's the whole purpose behind it. That's what they're trying to accomplish. And to me, it's an insult to the Constitution and to Americans. And it's the same thing in South Africa. When the ANC first started trying to take firearms away from South Africans, they came up with the Firearms Registration Act. And then they intentionally failed to provide any forms to most of the police stations where people had to go register. So you couldn't register your firearm. So de facto, by default, you become a lawbreaker because the government intentionally keeps you from doing what you're trying to do as a good citizen. And this, to me, is just an abuse of power and abuse of the law. And, you know, it starts in totalitarian states. The fascists did it in Nazi Germany. In Italy, the communists did it in the Soviet Union, and in China, and in Venezuela, and Cuba, and North Korea. Of course, I don't know if you know this, Gideon, but we are alliance members with North Korea. Kamala Harris went to the DMZ and said the long relationship between the Republic of North Korea and the United States is enduring and shall not fall. Anyway, but no, these laws are really meant to incriminate or to criminalize lawful behavior. Kind of like the lockdown when Beckett Seeley was crowing, "Oh, we've arrested 230,000 South Africans for violating lockdown." Yeah, mothers nursing their children in their backyard, parents walking on a beach, no one around. Give me a break. This is abuse of power. I see nothing else.
Well, that's kind of the trend is governments, especially strong central governments, and it's not just the United States and South Africa. I mean, the Australians and New Zealanders, Canada, very guilty of this, United Kingdom itself equally so. And the Germans have kind of gone back to their early 20th century roots on this issue and are extremely guilty of it. Is the monopoly on the use of force and violence is something that paranoid governments want. They're absolutely not just uncomfortable with the idea that ordinary citizens can be as armed or even better armed than state agents and actors, but they outright sort of hate it. And they are going to whatever lengths they can legally get away with in order to pursue an agenda of total civilian disarmament. And I think we've gone beyond the stage where people go, oh, but that's just a conspiracy theory. It's like, well, no, if you kind of look at the causal direction and the application of these so-called common sense gun laws, there's nothing common sense about them. I mean, you can bring out study after study that says these things don't work, and there are plenty enough out there. And you can ignore the studies and just look at reality and look at what life is showing to you about criminals in countries from Norway to the United Kingdom, to France, to Australia itself, bypassing gun laws wherever they want, because they can, because wherever there's criminal demand for firearms, the supply will find it. And you go, well, apart from just keeping ordinary good people that are going to be your responsible, disciplined, knowledgeable firearm owner who obeys the law, apart from keeping them disarmed, you're achieving nothing else. So these things are pro-crime, they're pro-authoritarianism, and they're probably, from what one can see, that way by design. It's not an accident or a coincidence.
No, absolutely. I agree with 100% there. One of my viewers has asked me if I can tell them who you are. It's in the description of the video, but I was just busy while you're doing that, making a little thing to put on the screen. I'm speaking with Gideon Joubert, the founder of Paratus. Anyway, sorry about that, Gideon. I just got distracted by that. I've got some folks from the U.S. who are watching the program who aren't familiar with you. Actually, why don't we do this before we talk more about these gun laws? Let's, if you don't mind, a little of your backstory, because I've had you on before, but we've never, and I think I've been on your program once, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I was just drunk and forgot. I don't know. but you did have this whiskey on Friday thing or something like that at one time. And getting ready for this broadcast, I just did a quick thing trying to find a decent photo of you that was complimentary. It's on the internet. You know, when people attack the Second Amendment rights and firearm owner rights, so they try to make memes. But I did find a photo. But anyway, looking there, I did see something when you'd been interviewed talking about why you became such an advocate for firearms and personal defense. And if you don't mind telling a little bit a personal story, I understand that there was a carjacking, a kidnapping attempt, and you used your wits and you survived, or otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation today, most likely.
Yeah, so that was Easter weekend 2007. That's a while back now. And it ended up with a home invasion at about 2 o'clock on Easter Sunday in the morning. And it ended up with me in my own car with 3 armed robbers that have effectively kidnapped me and were taking me with them to wherever it was they were going next. And I managed to kind of keep my wits about me for the most part. I got a hold of my pepper spray because at that time I didn't have a gun yet. And I kind of waited for what was not the perfect opportunity, but the best one I was probably going to get at that time as the vehicle was slowing down, to spray them with the pepper spray and bail out the left rear passenger door, which was fortunate because we were in the right-hand lane of a two-lane main road. And all that I got out of this example is I think I bailed out, if I recall correctly, about 80 kilometers per hour, which is, I suppose, close to 40, 45 miles per hour for the American.
That's 50 miles an hour. Ooh, that's fast.
50 miles per hour. I got a fair amount of road rash, but it was superficial lacerations. I did not end up on the sidewalk where there are things like lampposts and other horrible things that could really end your day. And I managed to get out of that situation without more damage than that. The vehicle was recovered the next morning by the police because they couldn't drive it much further. I think about 300 meters from where I abandoned or bailed out, they more or less recovered it with minimal damage. And it was a big lesson for me at that point regarding the concept of personal safety and personal security. And that's when I started taking the stuff really, really seriously. It was never my profession up until quite recently, when I became a professional firearm instructor and someone that devotes a fair amount of my spare time to training people and talking about it. But there are lots of people that aren't as lucky, and the major determining factor in my case was it was purely my mindset. I had no special skill set. I had no special equipment on me apart from the pepper spray. It was a decision, an active decision I made when I got in the car with them. Is like, I will do whatever it takes to get out of the situation alive and escape at the first opportunity. But I'm definitely not going to comply with what these people want. I do not care what they're telling me. I am going to somehow prevail, and I will figure this out. And that was what was going on in my head at the time. And I think that's something everyone needs to understand, is you don't need to be the biggest, strongest, fittest guy in the world, but you need to make a decision in your head, preferably every morning you get up, that whatever happens today, I will prevail over these circumstances, and I will come home alive and well to my loved ones, regardless of what I have to do in order to do that. And that's probably the most overlooked and least spoken about concept of personal safety. Is what is your mindset? And the next one that also needs discussion is, where's my situational awareness at? Am I aware of what's going on around me? Am I in code yellow? Is Colonel Cooper smiling at me from above, or is he disappointed?
No, that's a great point, Gideon. And it's interesting because we can talk a little bit about that specifically. So, you obviously made a decision that I'm not dying here this day. And you did it in the heat of the moment, obviously under a lot of stress, probably a bit of fear there. At the times you said, you weren't a person experienced with firearms or personal safety defense and defensive measures, but you made that decision. And others have done that too. Of course, I was a counterintelligence agent and counterterrorist specialist. And for years, when I first started the business, we taught, because that's what we were taught by the government, that you don't resist. And in the early days of terrorism, that often worked, and kidnappings that often worked. But kidnappings have become almost violent in places like South Africa, Colombia, and now even in some places like where you see kidnappings in the United States. Kidnapping is almost inevitably going to lead to the death of the person kidnapped far more often than the recovery of them. And it's quite frightening. I'm not offering people advice here, but we just had a family kidnapped from their place of business at 9 o'clock in the morning, broad daylight, in Mercer, California, and they were taken away. The husband and the brother-in-law were taken away. Then the killer came back. By the way, this is a guy who has committed multiple felonies and assaults, kidnappings, rapes, accused of murder, and served all of 11 years in jail. And so he's out, and so he leaves. He drives back. He gets the mother and her 8-month-old child, and a few days later, all of them are found in an orchard, executed, apparently in quite a gruesome manner, which hasn't been released to the public yet because it's just been that disturbing. It was an Indian American family, not our Indians, but Indian subcontinent Indians like you have in South Africa, and it's just horrific. And my thoughts of this is, you see it on camera. They're allowing themselves to be led away by like sheep. And my thought is, do you not realize? I mean, maybe your fear is paralyzing you, but you're going to die. I mean, the odds. I mean, why would he restrain 4 of you and take you away? Why would he come back and get the mother? And it's, it's like Todd Beamer and the flight that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. They knew because they could hear the news. They were listening to it, that the World Trade Center had been hit twice, that the Pentagon had been hit, and they were on a plane that was turned around. They knew they're turned around. They were headed the right direction, and they knew they'd been taken over by these hijackers. And they realized that if they didn't do something, a lot of people are going to die. And those are real heroes. I mean, they gave their lives, and maybe they thought they could do something, but I'm pretty confident and convinced that they knew that they probably weren't going to survive it, but they couldn't in good conscience let that plane fly into another building and let someone else die. And in that moment, it's difficult for all of us to say what we're going to do and how we're going to react. I've found myself in that situation more than once. It doesn't make you a hero, but life is precious, and you shouldn't allow some scumbag to exterminate or extinguish your life. And I'm glad you survived that. So I got to meet you and talk to you, and not in person, but we'll do that soon enough. But otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I mean, listen, I have no doubt in my mind, knowing the nature of violence in South Africa, that you wouldn't have survived that day if you hadn't bailed out of that car at 80 kilometers per hour. Well done.
Well, that's just kind of the thing as well. And there's this pervasive sort of thing that people were indoctrinated with. And it's not just in the US, where it's like, just give them what they want and I'll leave you alone. Like, don't resist, don't be a hero. And you go, well, these are people that have made a career out of being violent, out of forcefully taking that what does not belong to them, and doing it through threats of violence. Why would I trust them to not actually subject me to extreme or ultra violence in the process of this? I mean, I haven't had much major surgery done on me ever. In fact, very little. But the idea of going under the scalpel and being under general anesthesia scares the shit out of me, to put it like.
Well, I'm right there with you. That's a huge trust. A huge trust.
That's a huge trust. And and this is where I'm placing my trust in highly trained, highly educated medical professionals that have done this a lot of time. They are committed to doing no harm to their patients. They're doing this in a controlled environment with as much caution as possible. There's a lot of steps going in before you end up there on the operating table. And we are hesitant and intimidated by that concept. But we're expected to just take some criminal, some violent scumbag off the street's word that if we give him what he wants, he's not going to, put his knife into you or shoot you or do anything else horrible to you. And that sort of disconnect with reality, it just doesn't work for me. I'm like, the best situation is there are 3 steps to how you deal with these people. The first one is you avoid them.
Yeah.
You try not to get into situations where you share space with them at all. If you can't avoid them, you evade them. But if you have none of those 2 options available to you anymore, then your third option is counter. It is to fight back with everything you have in you and do whatever it takes, no matter how distasteful, to prevail over them in that situation. Because I've absolutely no doubt that a lot of people would be alive today if they could find it within themselves to just say, screw this. I'm not just going to let this guy kill me. I'm going to roll the dice. It's a bad situation. I might end up dead, but if I don't do something, I'm definitely going to be dead. And once you've made that mental shift, there's very little, you will never, ever, ever go back. Firstly, there's nothing that's going to ever program to say, no, maybe I should just comply. And I think the second part to that is, and then you're going to start looking for skills development, knowledge development, and equipment to supplement and enhance that change in mindset and make you much more effective at protecting yourself and the people you care about. And I think it has to start with mindset always.
Yeah, I think a lot of this too, Gideon, is that the average person just doesn't imagine in their mind that people could be just so evil, and you don't expect it, and as a consequence, you live your life and you're not expecting this sort of thing to happen. But honestly, if you live in certain places, you need to be cognizant of this. Situational awareness is critical. We all let our attention fade. We get distracted. We may put ourselves in a place where maybe you shouldn't be at that certain time. And it shouldn't be that way, but that's just the way life is. So, but most of the time, people should be situationally aware. I mean, honestly, in South Africa, when I was at Menlyn, which is not the most dangerous place in Pretoria, but I was at Menlyn driving alongside it, headed over to Linwood, which is quite ritzy. But I was headed to Linwood, and I got stuck in a robot, and people were not happy that I left space between myself and the vehicle in front of me. Well, there's a reason I left the space there. Because if I can't escape, at least I can run them down and crush them between the vehicle in front of me, and then run backwards and crush them if they come after me. I just thought there's a reason for that. Anyway, but the point is that people just don't think about it. Wolf K's got a question. I want to get to it, but I want to talk about 3 cases very quickly. One we don't know, but I suspect the person was led to slaughter, unfortunately. Let me just bring up 3 cases when you talk about would I trust this person who's a lifelong criminal and doesn't care. And also you got the idiots who are using illicit substances or high on that, and you're going to trust someone's judgment. He's not going to hurt you when he's doing tick or something like that. So the first one I want to talk about is the young lady who went to, was it UCT or Rhodes? Went to the post office to collect her parcel there in Cape Town. And lovely young lady, I can't think of her name right now. And she was told, well, I can't do it right now. Can you come back when we're closing and I'll take care of it? It came back, and then the postal worker raped and murdered her and dumped her body. Now, I suspect he probably did something like, well, come on back here, you have to sign for it or something like that. And she trusted him because he was in a position of pseudo authority and a place he wouldn't expect a postal worker at the post office to be a murderer and a rapist. So probably, unfortunately for her, that cost her life. Then we also have the situation of Hannah Cornelius, the horrific story of Hannah Cornelius in Cape Town, in Stellenbosch, actually, when her friend, a stunningly beautiful young lady, and her friend who was a young guy who's colored, they were out at the clubs, and he was going to go home on his scooter, and she's like, no, that's dangerous, let me give you a ride. So she gives him a ride home. These guys are waiting. They pounce. They jump in the car. They use a screwdriver. They drive him around. They drop a boulder on his head, leave him for dead in one of the vineyards. And then they gang rape her for over 12 hours repeatedly. And she begs for her life. She says, listen, if you rape me, I won't resist. Just please don't kill me. They rape her for a horrible 14 hours. And then they drop a boulder on her head and bludgeon her to death. And she trusted that these scumbags would simply just rape her. That's all they wanted. Rather than resist. And then the final one to talk about here is, let's see, so it's Amy Beale. Towards the end of apartheid, Amy Beale, a U.S. graduate student who went to South Africa in the Western Cape and was working with colored women to help them realize their rights and freedoms and liberties, and had done much good for South Africans. She was giving her friends a ride back to the Cape Flats. They cornered her car because she was blonde and had blue eyes. They drug her out of her car. They bludgeoned her to death as she screamed and begged for her life. Now, in the case of Amy Beale, and in the case especially of Hannah Cornelius, the scumbags who did this laughed about the agony as the parents sat in the courtroom listening to the horrific situation that happened to their daughter. They laughed about it. In the case of Amy Beale, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission let these violent scumbags free. And a couple of them are still alive and they still walk the earth. But Amy Beale was bludgeoned to death in a horrifically painful, brutal fashion, which is described in court. My point here is that these are 3 cases of women trusting others, trusting men, to not expecting them. Well, in the case of Hannah Cornelius, it was obvious that she was in a situation. She probably, we don't know the circumstances, if she had a chance to run or whatever. But my point here is that their lives are just taken, and in a horrific fashion. And it doesn't appear that they resisted or they did anything to protect themselves. I'm not condemning the victims here. That's not my point. My point here is that it just makes you think, why in the world, the question you raised, why would you trust a lifelong criminal or someone who has the audacity to stick a firearm or a knife in your face and threaten you? Why would you trust them with anything? I wouldn't trust them.
Well, exactly that. And I've got a close friend. He is very much a reformed ex-gang member or ex-gangster. He was in the gangs as a teenager. He managed to get out of them in his mid-20s. And the story about how he got out of them is kind of his to tell, and it's harrowing. But as a part, he ended up he's much older now. He ended up working as a technical consultant in a very interesting field for a multinational corporation. So big time turnaround of his life. But he spent 8 months with members of his gang awaiting trial in Pollsmoor prison. And his description of it was, he said he spent only could get about 3 to 4 hours sleep every night, because the rest of the time you're awake and you're fighting with people who are trying to do awful things with you. And he said, fortunately for him, he was stuck in there with about 8 or 9 members of his gang, so they could protect each other against the prison gangs, because there's a big difference between the street gangs and the prison gangs, as well as everyone else. And he said the major problem, apart from the fact that he saw awful things in there, that he wished he had one of those Men in Black little memory erasing sticks, the absolute human depravity he witnessed. his words to me were, you need to understand that there are people in this prison who spend the entirety of their time when they're not sleeping or eating, either looking for someone to rape or kill, doing the raping, killing, or assaulting, or making implements with which to do it, or planning how to do it. And goes, and the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that these exact same sociopathic, murderous, violent, horrendous creatures aren't just in prison. They're outside the prison walls as well, and they circulate amongst the rest of society. And you might not know who they are until it's a bit too late, unless you spot them early. But he also became a very strong advocate for personal safety, personal defense, self-defense, and that sort of stuff. And he became a very good self-defense trainer subsequently, much later on. He's still in Cape Town. He still does very good work, but it's very low key. The thing is, that to me is a perfect illustration. There are absolute monsters out there. We do not live in a My Little Pony universe where, there's the good always prevails and this sort of thing. They are awful, dangerous predators, and one needs to be equipped to deal with them, and they're not going away. You can't wish them away. You can't immigrate away from them because they're in Europe as well. There might be a lower concentration of them there, so a risk profile might decrease, but they're still there, and you can't assume you are safe. Therefore, you are always the first responder to your personal emergency. Equip yourself adequately, not necessarily with guns, although that's definitely the best tool for personal defense out there that's in present circulation and invention, but definitely with the right mindset and with the right skill set, because these people are there. They're not going away.
Well, Gideon, the thing about this is that you have willing enablers, people with these so-called kind hearts and believe that these psychopaths can be reformed. You're not going to reform Jeffrey Dahmer. You're not going to reform any of these people like this. And we see the horrific consequences of this and what happens when these people are allowed back on the street. Famous case of Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger, who was a murderer of prostitutes and was put in prison for life in Austria since they don't have the death penalty. And then he became an accomplished author while in prison, and it was a case celeb. And all these liberals in Austria were screaming, oh, it's wrong, he's reformed, he shouldn't be in jail. Never mind the fact that he took someone's life, but the fact that she was a prostitute is probably why they didn't give a flying flip, But so they get him out of jail. The Austrian authorities relent and let him out of jail. 11 women that we know of were murdered, strangled to death after he came out. And this scumbag started in the Czech Republic with a woman who wasn't even a prostitute, just a girl at a club, who, she traded sex for favors, but not money, So, but I mean, I guess that's sort of prostitution, but she wasn't formally a prostitute. But he murdered her in the woods, and then he went to Austria and murdered others, and then, so he murdered her in the Czech Republic, murdered 7 prostitutes in Austria, and then flew to the United States and murdered 3 prostitutes in Los Angeles. 11 women died in horrific circumstances because these bleeding heart scumbags scream that this person should be let out of jail. And this is the cognitive dissonance about psychopaths and pure evil really beggars the imagination. And we see it today. It's unbelievable. The crimes that people will just ignore and dismiss because someone's sexy or they're interesting or wow, this is the cool thing. Humans are such ridiculous sheep. I remember Kony in 2012. We're going to go over Joseph Kony in Uganda. Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army have been causing chaos and killing people and making child soldiers and raping and torturing for almost 30 years when someone said, hey, let's do this viral campaign. By the way, Joseph Kony still hasn't been caught. He's in the Central African Republic, although his organization is mostly dismembered, but not because of Kony 12. And remember Barack Obama's lovely wife, Michelle My Belle Obama, our girls, Chibok. They are still missing. Half those girls are still either dead or sex slaves somewhere. And what about our girls? Meanwhile, Michelle is in Martha's Vineyard, busy kicking out criminal alien invaders and, trying to prevent windmills from being put up.
Now, I remember the Joseph Kony story, actually, sadly, now that you mentioned it, I've kind of memory hold it a little bit, which was great. But the Bring Back Our Girls thing, I mean, Boko Haram is now so strong in Nigeria that there's a very good chance that they are going to come out on top and victorious in their insurgency against.
To be fair, technically, it's really now ISWAP. They broke apart, and the major and most powerful faction is called ISWAP, the Islamic State in the West African province, or something like that. So.
Yeah, but be that as it may, I'm not 100% sure about the labels. The Nigerian government is actually not going to win that one. They're far too dysfunctional. So bring back our girls. If now, like a decade later, is ending up with the complete defeat and overrun of Nigeria's security forces in the east and northeast of the country. Liberal virtue signaling doesn't work. I don't know if that surely can't be a hot take, though. I mean, you and I know it, and I think most of the audience know it. And unfortunately, when it comes to violent people, the hashtag thoughts and prayers and that stuff that doesn't work. Not when you're faced with them in your sort of personal space. Circling that back to the Second Amendment, that's the other thing that I don't understand about what the right to keep and bear arms actually means. It means you have the right to defend your life and the people you care about, your freedom, your family, your property, everything that matters, both physical, spiritual, whatever it is that is manifestly enriching to you as a human being. So long as that doesn't mean you're being predatory to somebody else. I mean, a criminal can't defend his ability to be a criminal, but that's just a technical point. The Second Amendment represents the defense of all that is good and all that is sacred to a free person. It's not really about guns at all. It's just about guns because
it's the concept of use of deadly force.
Well, exactly. And that's also why the founding fathers used the word arms, not firearms, not rifles, not muskets.
They didn't say muskets. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a concept that transcends the physical invention of a gun, which is why when people go, oh, well, but when they wrote it, is it still valid to modern firearms? It goes, it's valid to whatever it is we will have 300 years from now. It is
exactly. When I get sharks equipped with freaking lasers on their head, that applies.
Exactly that. And it is I'm going to go complete
Austin
anarchist
Powers.
radical on you because that's who I am. It extends to tanks, fighter jets,
howitzers,
drones, and screw it, nuclear weapons as well. Because to be honest, I don't trust the state with nuclear weapons. But we're supposed to. I mean, we're sitting probably closer to nuclear war now than we've been since 1963. So I would just like to ask people, how's all that trust in the adults in the room having the remote control pertaining to they've got the monopoly on the use of nuclear weapons and armies and all this stuff? How's that working out for us now at October 2022? Because in my opinion, not very well.
No, I would agree 100% on that. Okay, so yeah, I got the deadly force in there. And in fact, in the States, you are allowed to use deadly force to protect other life, someone else's life in jeopardy, even someone you don't know. You can intervene, and we've seen that. We saw that in Texas when this guy tried to steal a firearm from a training range, and he was caught, and he went outside, and he tried to leave, and then they called the cops. The cops show up, and the two cops come try to talk to him, and he pulls a knife and stabs the female officer in the chest with deadly force, and the cop pulls his firearm to the other cop, and the guy tries to run away, and three marksmen come from inside the training center with their sidearms drawn, and they're all like this, and I think they put about 40 rounds in this guy, and it was justified shoot because they were defending the life of another person. Now, Wolf K has been very patient. Thank you, Wolf, and I'm sorry, but I wasn't expecting to take questions from the audience today, but we'll get to it now. Wolf K has asked a question I have absolutely no idea what the answer is to here. Hopefully, Gideon, you do. A question for Gideon: can I still purchase ammo with my green license even though my white one has expired?
So that's actually a good question, and this is this is not advice, but if someone doesn't know about your expired white license, then they will sell it to you on the green. You can probably get into trouble with that if there's an audit done on the register and it's picked up that you've purchased on the green with an expired white license. However, the good news is you can now apply for your expired white license renewal. Well, not a renewal, a new one, without having to surrender your firearm to the police. So that directive has been issued. If you've got an expired license in South Africa, you can go to the police station, submit a brand new SAP 271 form, and wait for that to be processed. So I would just go and relicense that firearm. It doesn't have to leave your custody. You can keep it. So yeah, that was the first bit of rational nonsense coming from the police in a while. So make use of it, definitely.
Well, Gideon, thank you for that. And Wolf K, thank you for your patience. He asked the question at least 3 times. I did see it each time, Wolf, but it wasn't an apropos moment to answer the question. You know, it reminds me, Gideon, of, once again, Red Dawn. And in Red Dawn, one of the most poignant things I learned. Now, listen, I grew up with firearms. I mean, I lived on a farm. I was raised to treat it as a deadly weapon and nothing else. That's what it is. A useful tool for hunting, for taking care of varmints, you know, as we like to say, like groundhogs and things that mess up your property. And also went to turkey shoots. Turkey shoot is a competition where you go and you shoot at targets, and you have different age ranges and different genders. But by the way, there were 2 of them. We only had boys and girls. I'm just saying there were 2 genders. We didn't have any other categories. There wasn't enough time on the range that day. And so I learned the role of a firearm, of a weapon, of a gun, a pistol, a rifle, a shotgun, what they're for, what their purpose is. I wasn't afraid of them, and I didn't treat them as a gat like I'm on, you know, Grand Theft Auto. It's ridiculous. And so, you know, from there I went in the uniform. I remember very vividly in basic training at the range in the dead of winter in Missouri, and it's cold there. South Africans always whining about how cold it is. You guys don't know cold. Maybe the Lesotho up in Lesotho know what cold is, but South Africans don't know what cold is. Missouri in wintertime, Fort Lost in the Woods, we call it, because it's Fort Leonard Wood. We call it Fort Lost in the Woods. Anyway, on the range with these city kids who had never touched a firearm in their life. One of them virtually crying, eyes welling up when, you know, a rifle was handed to him with no ammunition in it. Just going through a class, learning how to disassemble an M16, and we went to the range, and they're missing targets because they're afraid to pull the trigger. And I'm like, okay, someone needs to spend a lot more time with these guys, because I don't want them in patrol with me with that firearm loaded as we're going in combat when they're that afraid of the weapon. The point is that, you know, you have to have respect for it. You have to understand what it is. And most of the people who oppose firearms are people who have no grounding or experience whatsoever in the things I just talked about, and that's why they oppose them. Listen, I treat an automobile as a deadly vehicle. It is a deadly weapon. And we've seen that. I mean, no one needed me to tell them that. Maybe 20 years ago, people need to listen to me. But we've seen cars used in London on the bridge. We've seen them used in Paris. We've seen them used in Berlin to run people over at Christmas festivals, Christkindlmarks. It is a deadly weapon, and it needs to be treated as such. And the thing for me is that a firearm is no different than an automobile. I treat it with respect, and I try to be cognizant and situation aware of everything I'm doing. But I'll be honest, with a firearm, I'm far more situation aware than I am when I'm behind the wheel. Just being honest.
No, that's absolutely true. And it's this is something that baffles me hugely about people, is they go, you know, like guns are a so-called driver of violence in society. They're not at all. There's absolutely no connection between firearm ownership and violence. I mean, we could pull so many intra-country comparisons that you and I can go blue in the face and we'll be stuck here all day. But here's the thing. They don't think about, okay, if you expect a person, you can't trust your neighbor, for example, with a gun. You say, no. Like, civilians shouldn't have guns. Okay, all right. But you trust them behind the wheel of a vehicle, right? You trust them behind the wheel of that vehicle at all times of the day.
Or in the club drinking alcohol.
And you trust them behind the wheel of that vehicle, driving past a school when parents are dropping their kids off and they're running across the street, or driving past a park where kids play, or driving at high speed on a freeway. You ask no questions about the content of their character, the stability of their mental state or their emotional state, or any of these things, or even their just their driving ability at all. You just go, cool, he's licensed, drive a car is fine. We are okay with people voting, regardless of, you know, how crazy they are or stable they are, or we're like, no, as soon as you reach a certain age, you should be allowed to vote. It's the same thing with making children. There is nothing more dangerous than people populating the world with abused, neglected, and otherwise damaged kids because they are unfit to be parents and they're just downright awful people. We don't ever talk about curtailing these rights or abilities or privileges. We always zoom in on the gun thing because, again, the one thing that governments are terrified of, and I suppose liberals in the American sense of the word, that love strong central governments with a monopoly of force. As soon as you have armed citizens, that monopoly of force no longer exists, and you can't force people to conform to the bad ideas that you need a strong government to force down their throats. Like, there are 5 million genders. We need to let kids transition when they're 8 years old because they can make a decision to do that, right? We need to tolerate and enhance the capacity for so-called minor attracted persons to enter the teaching profession. You need to register a vegetable garden. All these terrible ideas would never be enforceable unless someone could threaten you with violence if you don't comply with them.
No, absolutely. You're spot on correct with that. It kills me. And that's what I always say, the same people that don't want, of course, now they don't want us to have cars either now, but that's not because they consider them deadly devices. It's because of their obsession with carbon dioxide. I think that we've got a whole coterie of lunatics in this world who live on the far extreme left who are addicted to carbon dioxide. It's their raison d'etre. It's their reason for, since you have a French surname, raison d'etre seems apropos there. Joubert. But their whole existence seems to be about carbon dioxide. That's all they and of course, they have no concept of looking at ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, looking at the amount of carbon dioxide in the air over the past several 100,000 years and how it's fluctuated up and down. But we won't get into climate discussion. My point is that these very same people have cognitive dissonance because they're just frauds. That's the bottom line. They're frauds. They're like cats. When you play with a string with a cat, they just ooh 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 ooh, and they chase it. They'll chase that around. Or dogs chasing their tail. The latest thing, in 2012 it was Joseph Kony. Then it was Chibok. Now it's carbon dioxide. Now, and it's 87 genders. They always chasing something because there's nothing to them. They're empty vessels, and it's really sad. And listen, I'm not a deeply religious person, but you know what I think is missing in the lives of many of the people that I'm talking about, Gideon? Faith. They have no faith. They have no sort of belief in any sort of higher power or higher calling or higher purpose. And that absence of something in life, they fill that void like cats chasing a piece of string. Anyway, that analysis just came to me on the fly, but I think it's very good.
It's spot on because you need a compass in your life and a foundation.
There you go.
And who you fundamentally are as a person and how you view the world and your fellow man or woman and your place in this thing. One of the things I hate the most is this idea of a social contract. Now, there's plenty of people who are going to disagree with me when I say, but there's no such thing as a social contract because you never signed it. You were born into a world where people are telling you must behave in a specific way. You were never consulted on whether or not certain things are right or wrong, nor convinced, and you have no ability to opt out. Because the moment you say, okay, cool, you guys can have this, I'm opting out of the system, they go, oh, you didn't pay your taxes, you're going to go to jail, and there's nowhere you can go where the long arm of the IRS or SARS or whoever your revenue services can't reach, because they will, because there's nothing. The only thing they hate more than an armed civilian is a tax evader, okay, or even a tax avoider, but they still kind of have to tolerate right now because they still have to allow to avoid tax.
Yeah, but in the UK, they actually tried to make a tax evader the prime minister. The Indian fellow there almost became the prime minister. Of course, in India, all the newspapers were so stoked they were going to talk about the revenge of the subcontinent against the UK as Indians take over. Well, Indians have taken over the UK government. Look at the Tories. I mean, they're full of Indians. Look, that's not a argument against or for. I'm not making a comment. I'm not making an ethnic comment. I'm just stating a fact. But the Indian papers, you could see the salivation going on as it almost looked like Liz Truss wasn't going to become the prime minister. Oh, look. And this guy is a serial tax evader. He and his wife register in the Channel Islands so they don't have to pay taxes in the UK. We've got this idiot here in Pennsylvania, Uncle Fester, John Fetterman, who's running for office. And this guy was mayor of a town of 1,700 people outside of Philadelphia for 13 years, failed to pay his property taxes. And in America, schools are funded by property taxes by and large. Then they get, some of them, and of course, especially if they have people of color, they get lots of money daubed on top by the government at state and federal level. But local schools, we carry them on our backs with school taxes, even if we don't have kids in school. For 13 years, he failed to pay his property tax. Suddenly, it was all paid up the year before he was picked to be the candidate for lieutenant governor. And now he's running for Senate. I call him Uncle Fester, John Fetterman. It's just astounding. These tax cheats, a lot of them are these very people who claim that they hate tax cheats, and they're on the left.
Well, that's exactly it, right? It's rules for thee and not for me, or that's something I saw again. I think someone brought it up today because that's the situation normal in South Africa. But it's this lack of a compass, this inability to understand your place in the world and other people around you is one of the things I think that feeds into the idea that we need force to impose things on people that we believe are important. And as you rightly pointed out, what we believe important today is not what we're going to believe is important tomorrow, but it always has one thing it shares. It is a sense that we need to dominate and control. It's what COVID lockdown was a beautiful example of. We need to dominate and control you to the point where you're not allowed to go about your business, earn a living, pay your bills, but you must be locked in your house. Well, you're being forced to actually fail to pay your bond on it, and then it will be repossessed. It was the climate change thing is still right up there with it. We will dispossess you of the ability to travel autonomously in a car. You need to make use of public transport, how and when we tell you where to go, or you must drive a super smart electric car that can be turned off. Same thing that happened to people in Colorado.
Can be turned off remotely while you're driving it.
Exactly. And the people in Colorado with their smart home heating systems or climate control in their houses, that the power company just said, well, we are fixing your temperature at a certain point, regardless of how hot it is, and you must just deal with it, or how cold it is, because we're in the middle of an electricity crisis. We're not going to give you the opportunity to make these decisions yourself. So it's the large-scale infantilizing of people, making you dependents of the state as opposed to a free citizen that gets to vote for who these people supposedly representing you are, and you're being subjected. And that's also why the Second Amendment is more important than ever in the US, and why I'm glad to see that it is so alive, because armed citizens are the ultimate bulwark against state overreach. And a lot of people say things like, oh, but why aren't people standing up now and just doing something about it? It's like, because they still have the ballot box left. There are 4 boxes. You have the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box is the last one you use. And people, reasonable people, and this again proves how entirely reasonable farm owners are. You can have a stolen election in the United States. Sorry, YouTube's going to flag this. Oh, God. You could have a controversial election in the United States with a senile pedophile president who's got no idea what he's busy doing and leading us down the garden path into World War III. And he can make a whole bunch of terrible policy decisions, and people will still try to find a way to deal with it before they resort to the ammo box. And yeah.
No, that's great. I've not heard that before. I'm going to use that. I'll give you attribution for it, though. Those 4 boxes.
No, I stole it from someone far smarter than me. I can't remember who.
All right. Well, then I'll mention you though. But that's good. Let me go back to the 2 stories I was going to tell you about and get your thoughts on that. But before I do it, let me just bring one more thing up that's not related to this, because we're going to run out of time for too long. And that is, I love the cognitive dissonance of the left. And what I'm talking is extreme rabid left, particularly these who are obsessed with carbon dioxide, a simple molecule. Anyway, 1 carbon. 2 oxygen. Anyway, it's not really complicated. 3 molecules. Anyway, but so Joe Biden, first day in office illegally, because executive order doesn't have the ability to do this, canceled the further construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, which had been delayed for 7 years by Barack Obama. And I don't know why it wasn't finished during Trump. They did a lot of it, but it wasn't finished anyway. So he illegally stopped it. He stopped leases in the Gulf of Mexico in the U.S. economic zone. He also signed executive orders which were intended to make it more frustrating for fracking, tight shale oil, and things like that. And really sent a chilling message to the energy industry. And so he hates energy, he hates carbon. He talks about it all the time. Well, Joe Biden this week was crying that the Saudis, the Russians, I mean, first off, the Russians shouldn't matter because we're not allowed to buy oil from them, right? It's been shut down. So I don't know what the Russians taking oil out of production is going to have anything to do, because they're still selling it to China. But the Saudis and OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, decided to cut oil production by 2 million barrels. Well, the world consumes approximately 101 million barrels of oil per day right now, which is only about 6 or 7 million barrels more than at the height of the lockdown. Isn't that interesting? Oil consumption only dropped by 10%. We were all locked in our homes. Gee, maybe consumers aren't the biggest consumers of petroleum. Maybe it's industry and transportation, maybe, and governments. But anyway, so Joe Biden is crying about oil, and the Greens are silent. Joe Biden is saying, oh, no, we need, you can't stop selling this oil, but we can't sell our oil. Is this part of the world somehow disconnected from one? What was that? Well, Wakanda or whatever it is. Are we disconnected from the rest of the planet here? What's the deal? I mean, how come we can't dig up coal and we can't use natural gas and we can't use oil, but the Saudis can, the Chinese can, the Russians can? The left, not one word, Gideon, not one leftist climate zealot has said anything at all criticizing Joe Biden for going, wait a second, we need that oil. Isn't that ridiculous? It just shows you how every single one of them are total frauds. They're nothing but frauds. It's all a scam. I mean, they're nothing but frauds. And it comes the same thing in the Second Amendment. They're either ignorant or they're frauds. I mean, any thoughts on that before I get to these two gun stories?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a continuation of the irrational war on hydrocarbons. And I think what's happening here is you're having two worlds collide, the immovable object and the unstoppable force. And it's this sort of sustainable development United States agenda. I mean, not United States, United Nations agenda that's putting us on the road to ruin, as we've seen in Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Madagascar, a whole bunch of other places that went green and starved their people into rioting as a result. On the one hand, we are obsessed with cutting emissions. On the other hand, we can't keep the lights on and we can't feed people as a result thereof. So domestic policy completely out of whack with what the energy and production needs to keep the domestic economy alive. And then dependency on exports as a result thereof and now not getting, imports as a result thereof and now not getting them because you're not the biggest, scariest player in the room anymore. It's madness. It's schizophrenic. It's mad. It's schizophrenic. It's childish. It's all of these things. In short, it's the perfect sort of description of what the people who believe these things actually are. So they're at least on brand, I suppose.
They're on brand. Well, I consider it to be the perfect storm of lunacy. Perfect storm of leftist lunacy, all of it. The dichotomy of their arguments make no sense whatsoever. No, it's absolutely crazy. And of course, we won't even get into it, but the concept, there is no such thing as green. Everything, physics tells us that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Energy doesn't disappear. It becomes another form and it's reused as energy later on by physics and by nature. And all that aside, solar photovoltaic panels made in China that fail within 3 to 5 years don't get recycled. They get buried in landfills. They're made of toxic materials, as are the wind turbines. The Germans are burying them all over the place when they wear out because they can't recycle them. They can't do anything with them. And so the environmental impact of the so-called green energy is completely ignored. But let me get to the two firearm stories real quick, and then we're going to wrap up because time is short on us. But okay, so you may or may not know these stories, and I'm not going to mention the names. I'm just going to give the gist of it, so get your thoughts on it. The first is the story of a young woman who had been raped and her home invaded, and then 2 weeks later invaded again, and they attempted to rape her. I think she succeeded in not getting raped that time. Her brother, now she's a black woman in Philadelphia, law-abiding. This is just a few years ago, and she never had a criminal conviction. She's just a good citizen working hard, and now she's a victim of this horrible act. She didn't believe in firearms, so her brother said, go get a gun. So she got applied for and got a permit for a firearm in Pennsylvania, went to the range, learned how to use it properly. And, when you transport firearms in the States, there's usually some sort of rule, like usually you can't have it on your person. It's got to be in the trunk, locked in a box, the ammunition not loaded, that sort of thing. She complied with that rule in Pennsylvania, but she kept her firearm with her. So when she'd go to work or something like that, because she had a license to carry, she'd pull it out and put it with her. Anyway, so her firearm was in the trunk. And there's this asinine bridge on the south side of Philadelphia where the signs are very confusing, even if you live there, about where you're going to. I've been caught up in it once. I don't live there, but I've been caught at one time. And you wind up forced on a bridge going into New Jersey. And there's no way off. You turn, you can't back up. There's a toll booth there. Anyway, you're stuck. So you got to pay a toll. That's the first insult. Secondly, now you got to go to New Jersey. That's a greater insult. And then you come back. So she drove across. She has Pennsylvania license plates because each state is different. It's like South Africa. You have the CA for Cape Town, there, Western Cape. Anyway, and you have the Gauteng plates and anyway. So here in the States, we have different plates altogether. You're probably familiar with that. So the Pennsylvania plates are very different. She drives following the speed limit, stops at the bottom of the bridge, and she goes under, there's an overpass, and you turn around and you come back. It's not a U-turn. You go down, you turn left. And so anyway, so she stops, she signaled, and there's a state trooper sitting there just waiting to pounce on someone from out of state. She goes, as she makes a legal turn, she didn't do anything wrong. She starts to go up the on-ramp to get on the bridge. Lights come on, cop pulls her over. Starts questioning her. And he asks her if she has a firearm. In the course of the questioning, she says yes. And he says, where's it at? She opens the trunk. He confiscates it. He puts her in handcuffs and takes her to jail. She's charged with felony possession of a firearm. She's a licensed legal firearm owner who was forced into crossing this asinine, ridiculous toll bridge because these scumbags are trying to make money, and they intentionally make the signs misleading. And she did nothing wrong. She had no intention of being in New Jersey. It's the same freaking country. It's the same Constitution. Now, the reason that she didn't get convicted is because she's black, and that got attention. Because a black woman was arrested by a white officer in New Jersey, the immediate charge was racism. And so it was all over the press, all over local news. And then it was dismissed. The charges went away. Another story, more horrific, was a young man who was, young, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, I think it was, lived in Georgia and married to some wackadoodle, and apparently was getting divorced from her, and the mother lived in New Jersey. He's originally from New Jersey. The mother was worried about him. Apparently his cell phone, I didn't pay his bill, or it wasn't working, or he didn't have a signal. She's trying to call him. She can't call him, and he left Georgia. He's on his way up, and I mean, she needed to be more patient. She wound up causing her son a lot of grief. She called the cops in New Jersey and said, my son, something happened. His crazy ex-wife, I think she killed him. Anyway, so whatever. So the police have a health and welfare notice out for this guy. So he drives into New Jersey with his plates. I don't know if he had New Jersey or Georgia, but anyway, he drives in, and the state trooper pull him over. And sir, are you okay? You don't need distress. No, I'm fine. Thanks. What's going on? No, your mother, there's a notice. We're concerned about your health and welfare. I understand you're going through a divorce. No, it's fine. I had some of my things I loaded up. We're coming up here. I'll be staying with mother for a while. In the course of this question, of course, the New Jersey troopers always ask this question. Do you have a firearm? Yes, I do. It's in the trunk. Can I see it? They take it. They arrest him on the spot, charge him with felony possession of a firearm. He spent 5 years in jail as a convicted felon. 5 years in jail as a convicted felon. Nobody took up his case. Nobody raised his case. This is insane. Absolutely insane. He has a right to keep and bear a firearm. He was a lawful, licensed, registered firearm owner in Georgia, and this is what the state of New Jersey did to him. A place where he grew up, where he paid taxes, where his family supported that state, and this is what they do to people. This is simply government abuse, and he's a convicted felon. A convicted felon.
The government abuse is absolutely what it is. It's absolutely horrific to hear these stories, because I was familiar with the first one. I actually forgot that she managed to actually get out of it. No, that's great. But the second one is absolutely horrendous. And it's a case of every interaction with an American police officer can potentially go horrible for you. So I understand now why there are legal sort of defense attorneys in the States that advertise and say, never speak to the police, invoke the fifth and keep quiet and just get your attorney to speak to. That's no way to live. That's no way to because it inherently means no matter what, you have to be outright unreasonable about the interaction, because you are not guaranteed that the government isn't going to be outright unreasonable and try and put you in prison for a few years for just possessing something. It's nuts.
Well, okay, let me just and share with people some advice here. I heard on another channel some guy tell people that don't hire lawyers. I would never hire a lawyer. They're all crooked. Listen, my recommendation is that you hire an attorney if you find yourself in trouble. But as a former federal law enforcement official, badged and credentialed with the power of arrest and detention, and a person who sought warrants through the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act on people accused of espionage against the United States, Americans specifically, let me offer the following advice. We have a statement. No statement, no poly, no waiver. Make no statement to the police. Make no agreement to take a polygraph, and sign no waivers of your rights. You are entitled to your rights in this country, not elsewhere, not many places. South Africa, you have some rights that are similar to ours, most of them. But in this country, no statement, no poly, no waiver. Because let me tell you something. Law enforcement legally can lie to you. They can deceive you. They can trick you. They can mislead you. And we're seeing that being played out on a daily basis by the Federal Bureau of Incompetence and the Department of Injustice under Meritless Garland, going after law-abiding citizens, falsely accusing them things. Where is the Human Rights Watch? Where is the American Criminal Liberties Union? Where is the United Nations? The United Nations interceded in the case of a criminal who was convicted and then sentenced to home arrest because he went after Chevron. He's some leftist wackadoodle hate wanker. And the United Nations said that it was unfair and inhumane that he was locked in his home for 20 months. Well, it wasn't. He was a criminal. He should have been in prison. But meanwhile, we have people who were falsely accused on January 6th, people who never entered the building, who've been locked up without charges now for 18 months. That is not the way the world is supposed to work. No statement, no poly, no waiver, because law enforcement is there to trick you, to get an admission of guilt, to get a conviction. And your very words will be used against you by law enforcement. Now, I never lied to a suspect. I never tricked a suspect. I was straightforward and honest, but those tools were available at my disposal to do that. But I didn't see my role in jurisprudence and justice as tricking a suspect. My job was to find the truth. And that's the bottom line. Now, law enforcement are allowed to do that. But if you lie, and that's the problem with Martha Stewart. She was arrogant. The hubris of Martha Stewart. She's an arrogant asshat, and that's why she was convicted and went to federal prison. When she sat down with the FBI and the federal government, and they started questioning her about stocks, she said, excuse me, we need to get my lawyer here. I'm going to talk to my lawyer, and we'll answer questions through my lawyer. Because they have no evidence. They never proved that she did insider trading. She went to jail for lying to the FBI. For lying. They lied to her. They don't go to jail. She lied to the FBI. She got caught in a lie, and she went there. General Flynn did not lie to the FBI, but they used the threat of a lie to get him to take a plea because they threatened his son's life and it threatened his son with jail time, even though his son wasn't involved in anything. And he knew they had the power to do it. So General Flynn foolishly took the plea. He lost his home. He lost all of the money he'd saved throughout his 30-plus year career as a military person. Now, look, I don't like General Flynn. He's an asshat. But that is an abuse of power. And people think that because there's a conviction, that person's a criminal. It isn't always the case.
That's exactly it. And this is also when, was it a Roman philosopher that said, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous its laws?
Sounds right.
I think there was someone in the comment section is bound to go find it. It's a very similar situation. Is the more insecure, the more corrupt and the more sort of overreaching and tyrannical the government becomes, the more, not only the more numerous will become its laws, but the more vigorous its enforcement of really badly written ones that are probably unconstitutional. And I think America and South Africa are at a crossroads, separate crossroads, slightly different crossroads. But I think what happens from here on forward is probably going to determine the national course. Whether or not there's a united South Africa, I don't know. Whether there's going to be a united America and not a national divorce, I don't know. You might know better than I, Colonel. But yeah, interesting times, to say the least.
Well, Light Rain mentioned that it was Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist here in America, who said the 4 boxes of liberty. So that's apparently where it came from, an 1867 speech about rights. I'll do a little research on that, and I actually feel kind of embarrassed. I don't know that. I know a lot about Frederick Douglass. I'm not familiar with that quote. So if it is, I'll make sure Frederick Douglass gets credit for it. But yeah, no, listen, it's you said something, and we'll wrap up here, something you said that I think is very important, and I think people either are willingly acceding to this, big word alert, acceding, they're acceding to this, or they're just too blind and stupid to see it. And that is the infantilization of society. Civil society is being infantilized by bureaucrats, and oftentimes unelected bureaucrats like in Brussels for the European Union, who decide that Hungary is too right-wing for them, and they're going to punish them by taking 7.5 billion euros away from them. It's the infantilization of society is really sad. But Gideon, before we wrap up very quickly, because I'm going to get to my news program after this, I have put links in the video to Paratus.info and also to a Facebook page, which I presume is yours, also Paratus.info. Can you tell people a little bit about where they can find out about self-defense and about firearms and arms and the sort of things you do? Just tell them a little bit about it, and that way maybe we can pimp and promote those sites so people become more familiar with it. Not that you need my help. I think on Facebook you got like 26,000 people, and I used to have that many before shadow banning, but I don't even have 8,000, this tiny, sad little channel.
So mine is shadow banned, and it's declining as a result. So I'll be joining you down there very soon. They can follow me on Twitter. I'm occasionally on there. I'm on there far too often. It's a very toxic place, but I've got some good friends on there, and it's at Paratus 2014. You can find me on my website, which is Paratus.info. I'm going to try and write more regularly there. I've got a couple of really interesting projects going on that I can't tell you about yet, but that I will tell you about when they come to fruition. And this is all in essence focused about enhancing personal safety and security in South Africa by getting people to do it themselves and take it seriously themselves, because I think that's the greatest empowerment you can give someone, is to convince them that they have what it takes to actually defend their life, which is fundamentally important.
Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Listen, I have an idea and I've had it for a while here, and I don't know how I can bring it to fruition. I need to find somebody with deep pockets, but the Liberty Network is something I'd like to really make happen. An independent sort of media company that brings together a bunch of people, not something that simply promotes, Dinesh D'Souza or Crowder or all people looking for fame. And I'm not picking on Dinesh D'Souza; he's a brilliant guy, but all the people looking for fame and for wealth. But for people, and there's nothing wrong with fame and wealth, and we can all get that. That'd be great. But also people trying to make a difference in the world and remind people about the importance of liberty and personal choice in life and how it's being distorted by the left. And so the Liberty Network, if I can find a backer for that, you'd be welcome to be on there and be part of the program if you'd be interested in it. So anyway, looking to do something like that. Anyway, Paratus, Gideon Joubert, thank you so much. Or Gideon Joubert, if I get that correct. Thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to chat with you again. It's been a while since we talked. But anyway, do you still do this Whiskey Friday thing? Is that something that still happens? Or is that gone like the way of the dodo and ANC governance?
No, it's something I definitely want to do again. It's just my Fridays have actually been my busiest day in the week the past 8 months, and they're going to get way busier before Christmas. So maybe I do a bit of a New Year's special this year. Definitely going to do something in January to bring that back. Would love to be part of your network, Colonel. It would be an absolute honor and a privilege to be on there. So yeah, no, we'll make we'll have some fun. Let's put it that way.
All right, cool beans. Well, maybe once a month. I mean, I do a show with Fine Dutoy, former SADF member. We do that Fireside with the Colonels. I do another program called K-Nako, The Call of Africa with Dumo Denga and Koketso Razani and Nzulo. And then I have another one with Rob Hutchison from Dear SA called Answer the Question. Maybe we can come up with Defend Yourself or something like that with Gideon from Paratus. Maybe we can do that maybe once a month or something like that, if you're interested.
Absolutely. We'd love to.
All right, cool beans. I'm going to let you drop off. I'm going to wrap up here, and then I'm going to get started my news program. This program's going to end, folks. Thanks a lot, Gideon. We'll catch you later. Have a lovely, I was going to say weekend, but I think it's Sunday. So enjoy what's left of your evening on Sunday.
Thanks, Colonel. Speak to you soon. Cheers, viewers. Bye-bye.
All right, cool beans, folks. That was Gideon Joubert, also known as Paratus. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you found this interesting and informative. I enjoyed the conversation. We'll be back shortly with the news already supposed to be on. I see people are bailing. I hope that some of them come back for the news program. If you're here for the news, my apologies. We'll start with that in just a couple minutes. Thank you very much. And great idea, Liberty Network. Yeah, Gus, it's something I've had on the table for a while, the Liberty Network. I'm trying to come up with it, but it takes a lot of cash and a lot of support so that we have multiple redundant systems set up. Since Donald Trump has failed us miserably, I hoped and expected for 2 years against all odds that he would actually do it, but he's failed us miserably with his Truth Social. It's been a huge disappointment. Not that it can't become something, but it's not what it was promised. Rumble has proven to be a big disappointment. Frank's speech is a huge disappointment. All these people promise a sunshine. I'm not promising sunshine and rainbows, but I do want a place where we can talk freely and honestly, and not nutters and not a bunch of conspiracy theorists, but actual people talking about the real issues about liberty. Thank you all so much for tuning in for this. That was a conversation about Second Amendment rights and other things and self-defense with Gideon Joubert from Paratus. You guys take care of yourself, and I'll be back in just a few minutes after a short break for Chris Wyatt Reports. Thank you for that, and hopefully we can get audience over there. Appreciate your time and support, folks. We'll catch you here shortly. Excuse me. Catch you here shortly on Chris Wyatt Africa. Thank you so much. Cheers, everybody.